Hi, I'm Edd Sorenson. I own Cave Adventures here in Marianna, Florida. I've been here 21 years, originally from Portland, Oregon. I'll be 65 next month, or next week. And I've been diving for somewhere around 30 years. And just had a great time starting a dive shop that I didn't plan on doing. I planned on retiring, moving here to Florida, diving every day. And I started the dive shop because I needed a whole fill station for myself because there wasn't anything around. And my accountant said, you need tax write-offs. Start a dive shop. I said, I don't want a dive shop. He said, well, just buy what you need and close it. And then you can write it all off. You need the tax breaks and then you're done. And I bought all the stuff and people started showing up and it just got busier and busier and busier. And then I went back to teaching. I had retired from teaching. I started teaching again and I've been having a great time. So looking forward to another 10 years. So what's my first memory of diving? Was my open water checkout dive. It was a little mud puddle called Battleground Lake in Battleground, Washington, just north of Portland, where I'm from. And it was a 39-degree lake. It was about 10 or 15 foot visibility. And it was so cold. It's open water class, so we're in a worn out, used, rental 7mm wetsuit. And I just remember coming up shivering so violently because it was so cold and that wetsuit was so crappy. And it was cold out too. It was October, I think. And then I remember seeing two guys that popped out of the water. And my first thought was, why would anybody dive here on purpose other than a class? The second thing was they were standing there calmly talking about their dive and how much fun they had. They used to have a roller rink that came out of this building and went out over the lake on stilts. And it had all collapsed from old age into the water. So that was the big draw, apparently, was going down and seeing this wreckage of this old roller rink. And I remember they weren't cold, they weren't shivering, they were just talking. And I remember asking my instructor, I said, what are they wearing? And he said, oh, don't worry about that. That's way down the road. That's a dry suit. I went, well, screw that. That's tomorrow. So I went right out the next day and bought a dry suit. And so until my cave class years later, I had 0 logged wetsuit dives because training doesn't count. So my first actual dive out of class was in a dry suit. So that was my first memory. It was freezing to death in that lake. So when and why did I start cave diving? That was kind of an accident. We had a trip, my brother and I planned to California to dive with my main dive partner, Buddy. And we had the tickets booked. We were all set to go. And a few days before the plane was going to leave, my buddy who was in California said, worst flooding in 70 years. There's no dive boats going out. Cancel your flight, get your money back, we'll do something else. So when I called the airport, they said, you have non-refundable tickets. They said, you can go somewhere else, but you can't have your money back. And my buddy, who was my open water instructor years before, we had become friends and did a lot of diving together. He had just moved to Florida, and he was doing guided wreck dive stuff out in the Keys, or Fort Lauderdale. And so I called him up, and he said, yeah, come on down. We'll go dive the Vandenberg, we'll go dive this and that. So we rescheduled that trip, and it was a couple weeks out, and I didn't even call Ken back until we landed in Orlando, and we're picking up the rent-a-car. I called him up, said, hey, we're on our way. And he said, oh shit, I forgot you were coming. Yeah, worst rainfall in 70 years. Everything's blown out, no diving. I said, well, we're here. We're in Florida and we're here for 2 weeks, so figure something out because we want to dive. And he said, oh, well, we can go to Jenny Springs and go cavern diving. I said, all right, let's do that. So Next morning, we woke up early, called him. He said, well, it's really bad. Everything's closed. You better call Jenny and see if they're even open. They're the last ones to go down. So I called and they said, we're open. It's diveable. Now, where I'm from, diveable meant 3 or 4 foot visibility. And I said, so what's the viz like? And they said, it's okay. I said, what does that mean? Give me something in terms of feet. It's diveable. I said, there again, those are words, we need feet. I said, 5 foot, 10 foot, 20 foot? Oh, it's probably 60. And I'm thinking, 60? I'd never even seen 60. So we showed up, met Ken, went to Jenny, and as soon as we swam into the ballroom, I fell in love. I said, oh, I gotta do this. And so we traveled around doing all the caverns that were still open, and I think it was Devil's Den, Blue Grotto, and Jenny's ballroom. That was it. And then a month later, I was back in Florida taking my cave class. So how was my cave training? Well, like I always tell people, my good friend Chris Richardson's favorite saying is you don't know what you don't know. So everybody thinks their cave training's great. You only find out later as you learn more about it, but my cave training was very good. I would say excellent. It was with Rose Meadows. She had just become a cave instructor then, and she was hard but fair, and I came in thinking I was a really good diver, like everybody does that starts, and it was a very humbling experience, but she tried to talk me out of, I wanted to do 0 to hero. I didn't know what that meant at the time, but she tried to talk me out of it. And I was certain that I was good enough to do it, and if I was traveling 3,500 miles to do cave training, I wanted to get it all done. So she said, the only way we're gonna do it is you're gonna pay me in cash up front for the whole class, and anytime I say you're done and you need more practice, you're done and you need more practice. And she was very honest and upfront. She said, if I say we're done, I don't want to hear any whining, sniveling. I want my money back, nothing like that. I said, okay, that sounds fair to me. And I did it. Towards the end, I didn't know if I was going to pass or not, but I did. And so I'd say it was brutally honest, humbling, intense training. But I had a great time, and I mean, I turned out okay. Still alive.
And what year was it?
97, I think. Would I think many years later that I'd have, and I don't even know how many I have, somewhere in the neighborhood, well north of 10,000 cave dives. Would I have gathered that then? No, because back then cave diving wasn't super popular except in Florida. So like coming from Portland, Oregon, there was only 3 cave divers in the whole state. There was only a few in Washington. Leon Scamhorn was up there. Another guy who was my buddy's inspiration instructor, I forgot his name, but anyway, there wasn't very many. So when I would come to Florida, we would plan at least 10 to 14 day trips, and we would try and get at least 2 or 3 dives in per day. I mean, it was just dive. And I had 3 friends that were cave divers. And so I would go with one trip with him, one trip with him, one trip with him. So I was trying to get, and then I'd go to Mexico every year. And so I was trying to get around 100 cave dives a year. But no, when I moved here, I planned on, my goal was to retire at 40. But when the internet stocks crashed, I lost about $250,000, and that kind of postponed my retirement a little bit. But when I moved here, I mean, I was diving every day. And my buddy, my main dive partner, moved down here and lived in a fifth wheel in my driveway for 6, 7, 8 months. And we were diving every single day. And that's why I had to buy a fill station. The nearest fill station was like 70 miles away. And, but it was just one of those things. It was a love. In fact, all the guys on my hockey team, I was on a trip when I found this house for sale. And I had planned on moving to Florida for several years. I just couldn't figure out where I wanted to move. And then when I found this, something told me, this is it. And I bought it right there on the spot. And when I got home, Stacy picked me up from the airport and she said, "How was your trip?" I said, "Good, I bought a house, I'm moving to Florida." She said, "All right, when do we leave?" And then a couple nights later, I had my own men's league hockey team. And we had a game, and afterwards everybody go to the bar. I don't drink, but I'd always go hang out with them. And they asked, "How was your trip?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm moving to Florida." "What are you going to do there?" Because I own my own excavation and construction company. And I said, "I'm just going to retire and dive." They said, "That's what you do on vacation. You'll get bored. You'll be back in 6 months." I said, "All right, save me a spot." And here, 21 years later, I'm still diving every day. I just got out of the water an hour ago. So, and then you remember Steve Gamble. He was the premier dry suit guy. He's the one that brought me here the first time, and he's the reason I'm here. We were really good friends. I miss Steve a lot. But he said 20-some years ago, "Ed, doing the kind of dives you do and the amount of dives you do, you're going to get burned out and you're going to quit." And here 21 years later, I'm still diving every day, sometimes 2 or 3 dives a day. Sometimes, if we're doing exploration dives, it might be 6, 7, 8, 9 hours. Then we're only doing 1 a day. But, there's been times where my main dive partner, Ben, would come over and he'd go, "What are you doing?" "Finishing a class." "What are you doing tomorrow?" "I got the day off." He goes, "You just did 28 days in a row in the water. You probably don't want to go diving." I'm like, "Yeah, hell yes I do." So, it's still a burning passion for me. I love cave diving. I love everything about it. And one other thing on the worst dive, cave dive, because like I said, they're all great. But now that I think about it, the worst, I'm going to have to say there was 2. In 2006, I was called out for a rescue. Now, this was prior to the 4 I did in 2012. So I never thought I would do a cave rescue. I was told it was impossible. They're all body recoveries. But I was called by the dive partner, and he said he's 900 feet back and he has gas. So all the gear's ready. I got to the site in record time. It's less than a mile down the road. I'm doing 100 miles an hour. I geared up, boom, I'm in the water. And I'm scootering full speed, and it's near zero. I can barely see the end of my scooter, and I'm bouncing off walls. I just need to get back there. I just know in my heart I can get this guy out. I can do this. And I'm zooming along and putting myself in danger by scootering way faster than I could see. And all of a sudden, at the second breakdown, I can't see the scooter, and all of a sudden, poof, it's crystal clear visibility. And it's right where it drops down, I almost smashed into that wall. And I got off the trigger, and I'm like, shit, I passed him. And I looked to my left, and there's this little side tunnel, and it was just billowing out of there like somebody was back there with a broom. And so I thought, okay, he's still alive, because this was churning so badly. He's got to be still alive. So I get there, and it's zero viz, so I get online, and I start going in. And I remember back in 2000, Bill Reneker was called for a cave rescue at Royal Springs, and I remember talking to him about this. We were down for one of our cave trips, and he said how this water, this brown, was just churning, and he knew somebody was in there still alive and panicked. And he said, so I turned around and I'll get him tomorrow. And I looked at him and I said, you knew he was alive? Why did you turn around? I mean, that just perplexed me. And he looked at me and he said, Ed, I knew he was panicked. A panicked diver will kill you every time. He goes, screw that. I'm not dying for anybody. So now here I am, 6 years later, going in and I see this churning. And Bill's talking to me on my shoulder going, screw this, Ed. I'm not dying for anybody. And I'm thinking, oh shit, am I going to die today? And then I thought, as I'm still going in, I thought, what could he do to me? I'm a pretty big guy. I can take care of myself. And I'm in a tunnel that's this tall. I said, what could he do? What if we come head to head? What's he going to do, rip my mask off? I don't need it anyway. I'm in zero visibility. And I got a backup mask right here in my pocket. Was he going to rip my regulator out of my mouth? I got another one right here. I got redundant everything. There's nothing he can do to me. And I just kept going. And then I remember crashing into a set of doubles with nobody in them. I was like, oh shit, he is stuck. Nope, nobody there. I kept going and then I ran into a hand. And he was deceased. I did the body recovery. And then I had to go back in and get the doubles. And when I got, as IUCR divers, we're supposed to note everything we can see at the incident site. Were his regulators working? How much gas did he have? Blah, blah, blah. But in zero vis, you can't do any of that. And so by the time I got him out, which was an ordeal, then, because he was so positively buoyant without tanks on, and then I had to decompress. Sheriff's Department came in and got the body, took him out. I decompressed, I came out, and then the lieutenant's like, where are his tanks, Ed? I said, well, they're still in there. He goes, well, I need them. I said, well, yeah, one thing at a time. So I had to get fresh tanks, and they had brought me more tanks. And then I had to go back in and get the tanks. Well, by the time I got back in, about 2 hours had passed, and there was some visibility. So I started making notes then. And I assumed, I even had them get me a stage bottle with a low pressure inflator on it to float the doubles, because I assumed he was out of gas. When I got back there and I could see, I looked at the gauge and it said 2,200 PSI. 2,200 PSI in a set of doubles. I checked all the regulators were working. I did all the stuff I needed to do before I removed them. And then later on, when we were, Mike Hodges from the dive team, the sheriff's dive team, and I were going over analyzing the gas. And then we sent them off to NEDU, Naval Experimental Dive Unit. But we looked at the computer. And if we looked at my computer of when it stopped moving and then started again, that's when I was at Harry. And when you looked at his, I missed him by less than 2 minutes. Less than 2 minutes, which is why it was still churning. And he had enough gas to sit there for an hour. If he'd have just stayed calm, I'd have got him out. That would have been my first rescue instead of 6 years later in 2012. And then my second worst, I'm gonna have to say, was last year when I was finishing lunch and Patrick came running up and said, come on, we gotta go. That's all he said. I said, all right, where are we going? And he said, Benny's stuck in the cave, you gotta go get him. And I'm like, oh shit. So by the time I ran down the stairs, they already had my truck loaded, running. Patrick's in the driver's seat. I jumped in the passenger seat and off we went. And I remember when they told me I was gonna die from cancer, and then I didn't. And I was talking to the nurse after all the radiation and stuff was done, and she said that I shouldn't be here. And she said, and she looked up like she was looking to God, and she said, he's not done with you. So as we're bombing down the road, Patrick's driving 100 miles an hour. I remember looking up and going, is this why I'm still here? And I knew this guy is on a rebreather. his dive partner, it's 15 minutes into the dive. His dive partner couldn't get him out. He couldn't get him unstuck. And she got right out. They were only 800 feet in the cave. She got right out and called me. So I know I'm getting my friend out of the cave. I already know it. And then I get there and he's deceased. And we went over everything. There's absolutely, we analyzed the computer, the rebreather. It just, when he got stuck, he panicked. There's no other explanation for it. You could tell it's AI computer, so you can tell exactly when he got off the loop and got on the open circuit, and how fast he went through his gas. And he died with one full tank on because he had a necklace regulator for his left tank, and he was stuck like this, and he was able to get, he had a little bit more room on this side than this side, and he was able to get that short hose regulator in his mouth. But when he ran out of gas in that tank, he couldn't reach this one because he was pinned so tight on this side. So he died with a full tank on. If he'd have been able to get to this side, there again, I missed him by less than 12 minutes. So if he'd have been able to get to this tank, another 85 cubic feet of gas, well, it had 115 cubic feet of gas in it, I could have saved him too. So getting called for a rescue and bringing back a dead body, that would probably have to be the worst. A great guy, Stratus Koss, was writing a book a couple years ago called Close Calls. And he called me up and said, I want you in the book. So think of a close call you've had. And so, some really bad, blah, blah, blah. We went around and around. Well, he never said you. He just said a close call you've had. Well, I thought about it, and I wrote about one of the cave rescues I did, because that was as close a call. I think it was the one about the girl that I rescued out of Twin Cave. I mean, that was the worst day of her life. She was gonna die. And I got to send her home. It was a great moment, but it was a close call. And so I told him I don't write. And so it took everything I could do to get this thing written. I'm a terrible writer. I can talk all day long, but as soon as I start typing, I forget what I was talking about. So I get this story done, and I email it to him. And he calls me up and he said, that was a great story. Loved it. But this is supposed to be about you. I go, what do you mean? It was about me. I rescued her. No, a close call that happened to you. I said, I don't have any close calls. He goes, what do you mean you don't have any close calls? 10 or 11,000 dives, you never had a close call? Doing the kind of dives you do, the exploration, all the shit you do? I said, no. Well, Stacy, I was talking to him in the office, and she was in the office, and she goes, well, what about the time you and Jason did this? And I said, that wasn't a close call. And he said, well, tell me about the story. So I told him. He's like, holy shit, that's not a close call? I said, no. He goes, that's a close call. What do you call it? I go, I call it another day in the office. And she said, well, what about the time you and Jason did this? So he goes, yeah, tell me about that one. So I told him about that one. He goes, oh, I like that one even better. He goes, write about that one. I said, I'm a terrible writer. He goes, all right, tell you what. He goes, I'll turn on the tape recorder, tell me the whole story again from the beginning, and I'll write it and send it to you. And that's what's in the book.
We're talking about Jason Richards.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, Jason Richards. And so when the book came out, I just told the story, the way it happened. And I even had the torn wing. I still had it from years later. I kept it. It's a endeared memory to me. But I wrote about it. Didn't even think second thought about it. And then the book came out, and apparently Jason calls me. And he's like, hey, buddy, what's up? He goes, what are you talking about me? I said, what are you talking about? And he goes, my phone's been blowing up. People bought this book and want to know what's going on. So I told him the story, and he's like, oh yeah, I remember that. There again, he thought it was another day in the office. So if you want, buy the book, Close Calls. It's good. It's a good book. What's my favorite cave dive or cave site? Boy, I've been all over the world, and you know, like Larry the Cable Guy said, what's your favorite beer? The next one. Same thing. Every cave dive is special to me. I love them all. But I would say if I had to pick, there's a lot of really fantastic caves in Mexico, south of France. The Lot region are awesome. We've got some great caves here. But I think the hands down best, it would be Abaco, Bahamas, Dan's and Ralph's. And I've been so fortunate. Brian is like a brother to me, a very close friend, and I'm one of the, I think, only two people, since he's been the guardian of the Abaco Caves for over 20 years, that he's let do exploration in there. Steve Bogarts and I. Other than that, Brian does it all. So I think I laid like 2,700 feet of line in one dive. We extended Dan's from like 6,000 to 9,000 feet. So the caves there are so spectacular. And why? Because Brian is the best person on the planet to be the guardian of those caves. They're so beautiful, and he is so protective of those caves. If you've seen the book, if you've been to the glass factory in Ralph's, there's these roses that hang down, and I've never seen anything like it in any other place in the world. And when he takes people back there, one, they have to show extraordinarily good fundamental skills before he'll even take them. And then when they get near that, he's like right there guiding their feet to make sure that nothing happens. I remember going to Mexico in the 90s a lot. And then I didn't go for a few years, and I went back around 2006, and I saw so much damage of the stalactites all laying on the floor, busted up. And that just drove home how well Brian takes care of those caves. So a lot of great caves, but probably Abaco is the best that I've done. What about cave exploration? How did I start? And you know, when I moved here, that was 2003. I bought the house in 2002. I had started side mount training with Bill Reneker, I think in 98, 99. But we never really finished. There was no such thing as a side mount class. It was all mentoring. Side mount was not an acceptable configuration. It was a job specific tool. And it was just to go into little tight spots. So when I moved here, there's 7 caves out here in the mill pond. 3 of them are big back mountable caves. The rest are all side mount caves. So I started side mounting again. And I looked to Lamar. He was Lamar and Jerry Murphy, where they were kind of helping me progress in side mount. There was no side mount equipment. You had to build it. So I built it out of all dive right stuff. Dove a lot with Jerry and Lamar. And then I was like everybody else that was side mounting at that time. If you were diving the big cave like Jenny Springs or Jackson Blue, then you were in doubles, and then you put your side mount on to go into little stuff like Gator Hole or Shangri-La. And then I got tired of swapping back and forth, and I've been a bodybuilder for 45, 47 years. And you know, I'm 65 now, but back then I was much bigger. And I always hated the feel of a backplate harness. It cut into my armpits. I had really big shoulders, big arms, big chest, and it was so uncomfortable. I hated it. And the original side mount stuff was very similar. It was a Transpac, so it came back here. Well, I brought it out here and turned it into an H harness. It was a lot more comfortable. And when I'd go back and forth, I thought, why am I doing this? Why not just dive side mount for everything? So I did, and I started pushing it. Then we started trying to get side mount acceptable as a training configuration. And then we got side mount classes. But I'd go into big back mountable caves, but in side mount, and all of a sudden, hey, there's no line in there. And I started pushing and pushing. And Jackson Blue, when I moved here, the end of the line was 4,500 feet back. The current end of one of my lines is, I think, just past 16,000 feet back. I've added somewhere in the neighborhood of 30,000 feet of line to Jackson Blue. We have it all mapped. When I first started exploring, I'd add a passage here and a passage there. And the late great Wes Skiles was also a good friend of mine. Anybody that knows Wes, awesome videographer, super diver, one of the original mobile crew that brought side mounting to North Florida, was a good friend of mine. He would come here and stay at my house for 2 weeks at a time, and we would go diving. And I remember one day him and I were diving a cave, and I wanted to show him a new section that I laid. And we dove it, and when we came out, we went to dinner. He's like, man, that was awesome. I have the map, the original map of this cave. Do you have that? And I'll add the survey to it. I said, I didn't survey it. And he said, then you didn't do it. He was very fanatical about if you didn't survey it, it didn't get laid. It didn't happen. So, and then one day, I think at an NSS CDS conference, he called, they were having an old timers talk, and he was one of the guest speakers. And somebody was asking him a question about exploration. And he said, like Ed, he's a great explorer. How much of that line have you surveyed, Ed? Right in front of, 300 people. So I never put in another piece of line that I didn't survey after that. So I haven't shared all of it with everybody, but I never laid any line that I didn't survey. So Jackson Blue, hole in the wall. I've laid well over 100,000 feet of line in caves around the world, mostly here. But I surveyed every bit of it. Thanks, Wes. So.
And you still actively exploring?
I'm still exploring. I had to take a little hiatus because of cancer. They said I was going to die, that I wouldn't see 2023. And thank God they were wrong. I believe that it's only over when you quit, and I wouldn't quit. And so I had to take a little break there it was about 200 days I was out of the water. But I've been building back. I shrunk down from 220 pounds down to 150. I was about this big around, as you remember. And that was another thing the doctor said I couldn't get it back, that I was too old to get muscles back. So now I'm in the gym here every day, 7 days a week, just to prove them wrong. They told me I was going to die, so I'm here to prove them wrong. And I'm a firm believer in that which does not kill you will make you stronger. So I'm still exploring. I'm ready to in fact, today I was on a dive after my student had finished full cave. We went on a fun dive, and I saw something that I need to go back and take a look at. So, it just gets in your blood and you just can't stop. What about the rescues? Briefly, because everybody, it's been done on multiple different sites on most of the rescues. So the long story short, the IUCR was formed, I think 98 or 99. I was asked, it was invitation only. I was asked, I joined. It was all volunteer. At that time, prior to 2012, there was only 4 cave rescues in completely water-filled caves in history. So that means out of a planet of nearly 9 billion people, there was only 4 people on the planet that had a cave rescue, or maybe it was, yeah. So in 2012, I did a rescue, and I'd done so many body recoveries over the years. And it's something that I've always done, and I found that I was very good at. and I've never complained. I've never asked for a dime. That was one of the rules, we couldn't, and I wouldn't anyway. But it was so nice to go in expecting to do a body recovery and bringing somebody out alive. I remember, one, getting to send them home to their family instead of, shaking the hand of their loved ones and saying, I'm sorry for your loss. But the paramedics and the police and all the sheriff's department and everybody that was topside, all cheering and clapping that we brought him back alive. So over the course of just in 2012, I did 4. And so I'm the only person out of nearly 9 billion people that have more than one cave rescue. And then I thought that was a fluke year. And one of the things is I'm right here. Most of the body recovery divers, when they get a call, they have to gather up all their gear, which takes time. Anybody that's a cave diver that's probably watching this knows how long it takes to get your gear together. Then you have to drive to the site. Then you have to unload your gear. Then you have to set your gear up. Then you have to dress. Then you have to get in the water. And those of you who are cave divers know it's like Swiss cheese down there. And now I've got to go find them. And so the chances of a rescue are, well, when they started the IUCR, they said, Henry Nicholson, the founder, said, it's called the Cave Rescue and Recovery Team, but there are no cave rescues. They're all body recoveries. And so we, from day one, I have my gear always ready to go. It's like a fireman. You see the old shows where they slide down the fire pole, they jump into their pants and they slide down the pole and they're on the truck. That's basically here. My guys know where all my stuff is. When I come back from a dive, no matter how busy we are, my tanks get filled first. And then they're put in their spot. That way, if we get a call out, my stuff's ready to go. I don't have to worry about, what do you mean they're not full? So my gear's ready. We have a checklist so that I never, in a rush, because a rescue or a recovery is always a rush, nothing gets missed. Everything's on the checklist. And so we can be at any one of these caves within minutes. And my guys are all cave divers. They know how to set my gear up. The very first one, when I was called out, we were to the park in less than 15 minutes, according to the guy that called us. And all I did was put my suit on, and Frank had all my gear laid out in a perfect order. So this tank's first, this tank's second, this tank's third, this scooter's ready to go. So it's just jump in the water, boom, boom, boom. A rescue became a possibility. And then another one, and another one. In 2012, I did 4 in 1 year. And it was just a freak of nature. It can't happen. It's an impossibility. And so I thought, I got all kinds of heroes awards and banquets, and it was quite the whirlwind year. And then I thought that'll never happen again. It's impossible. It just can't. And then in 2013, I got called out and did another one. And then I thought, well, that'll never happen. And then in 2017, 2:30 in the morning, the phone's ringing, and the best cave rescue team in the world, the guys that rescued the kids out of the Thailand cave, which, by the way, I was the first one called. But the IUCR didn't have a contract with Thailand. So we stood on standby, Mike Young and I, and they went over and did the rescue. But anyway, one of their guys got lost. He's one of the best, what the press and the media touted as the best rescue team in the world. And he got lost in a cave. And his guys didn't even call 911 because they were the best. So they just kept looking for him. They did 8 dives over 11 hours. And finally they called me at 2:30 in the morning because of my reputation. And they said, will you come find our friend? So I flew over there. By the time I got there, they helicoptered me up in a state trooper helicopter up in the mountains. And by the time I got there, he had been gone for 27 hours. I knew I was doing a body recovery. There was no doubt in my mind I was doing a body recovery. And I'm going through the cave looking up, and I'd look, and it was so stirred up from all their rescue efforts. The visibility was terrible. And then I saw that shimmering of an air pocket, and I saw the reel he had right there on the ground. He was reeling up Jason's old line. And it looked like somebody just dropped it and it was laying sideways in the mud. So I knew, okay, I'm gonna find a dead body right here. And then I remember popping up in that air pocket, and he's sitting there looking at me. I'm like, oh shit, he's alive. And I can't remember, I don't know who was more surprised, him or me. And he's been up in this small air pocket for 27 hours, so I don't know how much, if any, oxygen is still in there. Is he this calm, or is he going hypercapnic and hypoxic and about to fall asleep? So I wouldn't breathe. If you watch the video, every time he talks to me, I shut my DSV on my rebreather, talk to him, and then get back on my rebreather. I didn't breathe one breath of air out of that air pocket. But it was an amazing rescue, and one of those things that where you think it's an impossible thing. You're never going to have one, and then now I've got 6. So it's just one of those things that it's such a great feeling to send somebody home and not in a body bag. Sidewinder. So Mike Young and I are good friends. I love KISS rebreathers because of the name, KISS, the Keep It Simple, Stupid. I like simple. When things go wrong in a cave, and they do, that's why I do body recoveries and rescues. Things went wrong. Nobody just went in, decided to get rescued today, or decided to be dead. Things went wrong. When things go wrong, I like my solutions to be simple. I like my diving to be simple. I'm a simple kind of guy. I don't like complicated, I don't like complex. I like simple. I was not diving rebreather. I originally started rebreather training in the mid-90s. I think 96 was my first rebreather class. But I quit diving rebreathers because all there was back mount rebreathers. I quit diving rebreathers when I dove side mount everything. And in about 2009, 9 or 10, Mike came out with one he called the GEM, the gas extending machine. And it was a semi-closed, it was supposed to be for recreational, but there was this really small thing, and I thought, a few years before when the flow was really, really super high and we were doing exploration, way in the back, and the scooters were all slow back then, and if you had 2 stages hanging here, which we did, to get back there to where we had to crawl through to get to the really tight stuff, with the stages being pure drag, it'd slow you down too much, and it was really halting our exploration. And so I came up with a way to stage on top of your tanks instead of underneath. And your body curves here, your tank curves here, it sits right there. If you're coming this way, you wouldn't even see I have 2 stages on until you get by me. It was innovative, it really worked well in that super high flow. Anyway, when this thing came out, it was supposed to attach to a single tank BC. And it, like a pony bottle right next to the tank. And I looked at that thing. I was helping Slim and Gene Melton, a couple people were coming down here, and Forrest Wilson, and we would test dive this thing, the prototype. And when the very first one came out at DEMA, I said, man, I'll take that. I'm gonna turn it into a side mount rebreather. And I did. In fact, I still have it. And it sat right here, and I rigged it up just like my stage bottle, so I could take it off if I had to go through any super tight restrictions. And eventually, I became an instructor on it, but I eventually quit diving it because of the over-the-shoulder counterlungs. And super tight restrictions, it was just too much of a pain to take it all off, put it back on. Anyway, so then Mike came out with a side kick, sent me one, and said, here, dive this for a couple weeks and tell me what you think. And I told him I didn't like it. It wasn't ready for prime time. And he got mad at me. And anybody that knows me knows, if you ask for my opinion, you're gonna get it. good, bad, or ugly, I'm going to give it to you. And if it hurts your feelings, just know I don't care. You asked. You're going to get the honest answers. That's the way I'm wired. And Mike didn't like it. And I don't think he talked to me for 6 months. But it was a semi-closed. And then later on came out with the closed circuit version. And I loved it. And that's what I dove for the longest time. Well, one day, it wasn't DEMA, it was the NSS CDS conference was coming up. Mike's up in Arkansas, and the conference is down in Lake City. And he calls me and he says, I'm going to be coming down for the conference, and I got a new toy I want you to see. Try it out. I said, cool. What do you got? I'm not telling you. You'll see it when I get there. I'm like, you can't do that. And he said, you'll see it when I get there. And then he wouldn't tell me. So then, a week before the conference, he calls me up and said, hey, I don't know if it was a problem with closing on this new building or what. I can't make it. Can you run the KISS booth for me? I said, absolutely. No problem. Do it. Goes, okay, I'm going to send this thing to you, and you'll have to have your sidekick and this and blah, blah, blah. I said, okay, tell me what it is. Nope. Still wouldn't tell me. So one day a box comes, I'm opening it up, and here's the Sidewinder. And it was really kind of almost a back mount rebreather. It was already attached to his SMS 100 harness, which wasn't modified. I had modified it, mine, because it was terrible rig right out of the box. Anyway, I'm looking at this thing and I'm like, I don't like it. And I called him and I said, what is this? And we talked and I said, there's no moisture trap. There's no this, there's no that. He goes, Ed, just dive it. So I started test diving it, and it was a prototype. And it had these bags, and you had to lace them up, and there was like 40 laces. It was a pain in the butt to take this thing apart and put it back together. And I didn't like, you know, you know me, I'm a side mount diver. I want to scrunch through the smallest of things, and it was in my way. So I started changing everything. And I asked my main dive partner, Ben Martinez, I said, will you help me with this? Sure. He was diving the sidekick as well. And so the first day we get to the park, and I said, here's what I'm thinking. I'll put it on you first, and then I'll film. And he's like, no, I'm not wearing that friggin' thing. And I said, you said you'd help. He said, yeah, I'll videotape you. I'm not wearing that thing. And so we're gearing up. His girlfriend's there. We're sitting there. Her and I are talking. And I'm all ready to put the rebreather on. And I turn around, and it's gone. I'm like, who stole my rebreather? I'm looking around. I see Ben walk into the water with it on. I said, I thought you weren't diving it. Nah. I said, I'd help. Let's do this. And he was grumbling. He wasn't very happy about it. We got in the water, and he loved the thing. And we started making changes. And then we'd come up, change some stuff, go back in, come up, change some stuff. And then I said, let's go up, because the next time I was going to put it on, he was going to film me. And he doesn't want to take it off. He just kept diving. But anyway, this went on for months. And all the problems, we figured out ways to do it and now I can have my rig from a bunch of parts to packed, calibrated on my harness and ready to dive in 15 minutes, 16 tops. And I remember early on I wanted to get rid of the bags. And I told Mike, the Sidekick has that stainless shroud around the counterlong, and it's got all the little holes in it. It's kind of cool looking stuff. And I said, here's my idea. I'm going to make a little thing that's like a clamshell, and it would just hinge with a latch. And that way, instead of wasting these 40 laces on the bag, I could just drop it in there, clamp it together. So I tell him my idea. I do as detailed as I can do. I draw it out. I take a picture of it, send it to him. He builds this thing. I should have had it handy here. I'll take a picture of it at the end of this. But he does all this TIG welding, and it's a masterpiece. I need to have it hanging on the walls. And he built this thing in like a day and sent it to me. Overnighted it so it's here. And one dive, I hated it. It was like snag hazards. Anyway, but it was such a work of art, I kept it. But anyway, it just kept evolving. How do we make this better? How do we make it? I want to go through stuff this tall. And then one day we were doing an exploration way past, if you've seen my videos, you've probably seen the one that says 8 inches of fun. And that's basically an 8-inch restriction that everybody said was impossible. And I was going to go try the Sidewinder prototype in there. And the only 2 people that ever been through there is Jason Richards and myself. And Jason says, "Where are you going?" I said, "I'm going to hole in the wall. I got to survey that little piece of line I put in yesterday." He's like, "Well, you can't go through that restriction in that thing." I said, "Why does everybody keep saying that?" Because it was all over the internet that if you get any water in it, you're going to die. If you go through a restriction, you're going to die. If this happens, you're going to die. And I said, "Why does everybody keep saying that?" I said, "I'm the only one that's dove it, so how does everybody know all these things?" Anyway, Jason said, "If you get through that restriction, I'm buying one." So that was the 8 inches of fun video. I went back there and videotaped me going through the restriction just to prove it could be done. And he did. He bought 2 of them, one for him and one for Chrissy. Anyway, we got it to where it was ready to go to the public, and we put it out November DEMA of, I think, 16, and I did the very first class. The old training director for the NSSCDS, Bill Dunn, was the very first what we called the beta production model of the Sidewinder, and that's how we thought we were going to have it delivered to the public. And so he did the very first class. I was the very first instructor trainer, and that was November, and it wasn't actually going to be for sale or for delivery till February. And I think that DEMA was 3 days. And on the 3rd day, we were just opening up, and I get to the KISS booth, and Mike says, "I don't know how to thank you. This was supposed to be, I built this as a sump rig, and I was hoping to sell 2 or 3 of these a year." And he said, after 2 days of DEMA, we've already sold 60 of them. And he said, "They're all about your posts, seeing you in it, or you brought them here." And so, I mean, it just grew and grew. And if you look back at the social media back then, it was all negative. All people did was bash the thing. "Oh, it breathes terrible." I'm like, I have the only one. So when did you steal mine to see it breathe like shit? Anyway, and I said, "Mike, doesn't that bother you that everybody's bashing this thing?" And he said, "Well, if I wasn't working 7 days a week, 24 hours a day to get the orders filled and still being backed up, then I guess I'd be concerned." And it just grew and grew and grew, and still there's 3 of them stacked up right there for the class starting in 2 weeks. So I think it's still one of the best selling rebreathers in the United States, if not the world. So I've been, thank you, Mike, for letting me be a part of this. And and I'm certified on 14 different rebreathers, and I have 6 or 7 of them in the room back there. But that's the one I'm on every single day. I mean, it's been a great story. When we were talking about the Sidewinder, I had talked about that work of art that Mike did. Here it is. In one day, from a drawing on a napkin, he built this for me. Instead of having to lace it 40 laces into this bag, I came up with this idea how it would fit around here's the tower, here's the top, and it was still open so you could get to the ADV or the OPV. And this would, originally I had designed it to be a clamshell, but then Mike changed it, because then he wouldn't have to build the bottom part, into this, so it would clamp around the canister, and then this would connect to the harness, and it would sit up here. But it was a work of art. I had to show it. It was part of the evolution of the Sidewinder. The problem is this was an entanglement hazard I didn't foresee that on the napkin. So Mike, I keep this because it's still a work of art. You do really nice work. And I'm going to probably hang these on the wall. They're part of that great memory of being a part of the Sidewinder project that's still going 8 years later. So anyway, all right. So how is the current state of cave diving and cave diving community? It's a small, tight-knit group. It's kind of gone downhill with the popularity of social media, especially Facebook. I think there's a lot of overinflated egos, and my way is the only way, blah, blah, blah. Doesn't need to happen. I mean, but there's a lot of great cave divers. There's a lot of great cave diving people. I'm here every day. I get to talk to people all day long from all over the world. Today we've got people in from Brazil and Germany and I forgot where everybody else, Czech. So there's people from all over the world coming here, really great people. You know, like any group of people, there's always going to be those, you know, we won't call them assholes, but you know, there's a few of those. Too many to mention, but all in all, the cave diving community is quite good. A lot of great people, a lot of friendly people. I think it's and it's still growing. I mean, I'm still getting, you know, I'm booked. Here it is, you know, barely into October, and I'm booked all the way through March. So it's growing. People are still interested, even with the economy as bad as it's been the last 3 years. I'm still busy every single day, and you guys are busy, my other instructors. So I think it's all in all, it's still mostly positive and growing. Is the cave diving community the same or different from 25 plus years ago, 28 years ago, whenever it was I started? Yeah, it is. The cave diving community is so much bigger. Back in those days, like I said earlier, there was only 4 cave divers in all of Oregon, myself and 3 others. Very few in Washington. Most of them were locals here in Florida. So a lot of people didn't know about cave diving. There was no Facebook, MySpace, any of that stuff back then. So the cave diving community is much larger. And there was I think the cave training has really gone downhill, though. That's sad, and that's part of the reason why I started teaching again back in 2009. I think it was in around 2008 or 9, maybe 10. Every year the NSSCDS has a conference, an international cave conference. People come from all over the world to do this cave conference. And I spoke every year at the cave conference, and it was usually about side mount because I was pushing side mount for everything. I was ridiculed for it. You know, don't listen to Ed. He's dangerous. He'll get you killed. Nobody needs a side mount. All that crap. But the cave training had just degraded and degraded. I mean, JJ saw it, Jared Jablonski, he saw it back in the late 90s when he was still working at Jenny Springs, teaching for there. And he saw it, and they started the GUE, Global Underwater Explorers. And the first order of business was making sure that you did fundamentals before you started cave training. And nobody else did. But skip ahead back to the NSSCDS conference. Every year I spoke about side mount. Well, I get a call from Chris Wickman. He's going to be the chair this year. And he said, "Hey, Ed, can I count on you to talk at the conference?" I said, "Yeah, absolutely." And that was that. He said, "I'll call you as we get closer and let you know where on the schedule you'll speak." I said, "Okay." So a week before the conference, he calls me up and he said, "I want you to start the show off and your talk is going to be on complacency. I said, no, my talk's always on side mount. He goes, I know, but side mount's really growing now, and you pushed everybody that's been to your place and heard you talk about side mount. And the theme for the entire conference is degradation of training. The NSS CDS had their conference, degradation of training. They saw how bad training had gotten. I don't know if you guys are old enough to know what a Xerox machine is, but it was an early copying machine. And you had to have a master. And you made all your copies off that master. Because when you got the copy, it was slightly degraded. And if you copied that, it just kept going downhill till pretty soon you're looking at this thing going, what the hell is this? And that's what happened. It got to be, instead of teaching, I remember talking to legends like Lamar English and Lamar Hires and Woody. And when somebody taught way back then in the 70s and 80s, at first it was like mentoring, but they had to decide whether you were worthy. And then you just train until they said you were done. If you're not a cave diver, you're not done. And I'll let you know when you're done. And then it got to be where people started trying to make a living out of it. Do I make a living out of it? I do, but I didn't need to. I moved here to retire. I made my money. I did it. I started teaching again for the love of the sport. And I wanted to see, I saw as IUCRR divers that we were putting more cave-trained people in body bags. It used to be open water divers that shouldn't have been in there in the first place. And now we're putting cave-trained people in body bags because of poor training, mostly. So, they taught for the love of it. And now it got to be where, I need your money and then shuffle you down the road so I can get the next batch of money in. And they saw dollar signs and not people. I joined the IUCRR. I remember when my girlfriend at the time told my mom at a birthday dinner, why don't you tell your mom about your new job? And I owned an excavation and construction company, and my mom's like, what happened to your company? What new job? I said, I'm an IUCRR diver. What's that? And I told her, I'm a body recovery diver. She's like, wow, that sounds really dangerous. You must get paid a lot. I said, no, it's volunteer. I don't get paid anything. Oh, well, you're quitting that job. I said, no, I'm not. I said, the whole outlook, the whole reason for the IUCRR is so that police, fire, rescue divers that aren't trained in overhead don't have to put their life in danger to go get people out of overheads, and they're not trained for that. And I said, it's a worthy cause. I'm not quitting. I'm doing it. And I got to be quite good at it. But I got tired of putting cave-trained people in body bags. And I thought, I need to start teaching again. I want to start teaching again. I want to make people better divers. And I gained a reputation very quickly for having hard classes. Not necessarily hard, but really, I had extremely high standards. And so the people that wanted a whiz-bang course, I just want to get through this, get a card, I can figure the rest out, I'm really smart. They wouldn't come to me. If they knew how dangerous this sport was, and I got a wife and kids, I can't be dead. I need good training. I want good, thorough training. I want somebody with really high expectations. I want somebody with really high standards. They came to me. And I had people tell me, Ed, you're not going to have any students. And here I am for the last 10 years, booked up a year in advance, because there are people that want a shortcut. Fine, don't come see me. I don't give a shit. I can't teach everybody. But I'm busy because of my reputation, because of the high standards. There's people, just like GUE. Everybody said, oh, their standards are too high. They make you do all this unnecessary stuff. Nobody will do that. they're busy all the time. Guess what? People want a quality product. And that's why I started teaching again, and that's why this headed where it headed. What do I think the future of cave diving is? That's one of those crystal ball things. I've never been good with the crystal ball thing. My friend Chris Richardson owns Deep Six. He's really good at that. He looks at the trends and where things are going, and he has his own crystal ball, I think. I don't. What I'd like to see is a continued upswing of more. I get a lot of calls, kind of from the publicity that I've gotten from great people like Jonathan Bird, Blue World, Woody and Gus, and Dive Talks, the videos that you've done, the videos that Dan's done. A lot of people call here and say, oh, I watch all your videos. Fanfare, more people are looking to tech. So I'm hoping that the sport continues to grow, because if there was ever going to be a collapse of the cave diving community, I think it would be the last 3 or 4 years. Our economy's in the toilet. People have less disposable income than they've ever had, or for quite some time. But it's still growing. We're doing very well here. I'm booked clear into next year. So I'm optimistic that it's going to continue to grow. There's getting to be some more instructors that are coming up through the ranks that actually care about their students and not chasing a dollar. And there was a lot of instructors, and still are, that Chris Richardson calls them feel-good instructors. No matter how terrible you do, they're going to pat you on the back and send you on the, whoa, you did great. And because they're scraping and scratching for every student they can get, and they're afraid that if I flunk somebody, they might say something negative about my class, and I won't have any students. And so they just pass people that shouldn't be passed. And that's actually good for me, because we have a fundamentals class, which we'll be talking more about later, and a CCR fundamentals class, and I get people all the time that are already full cave, or in CCR full cave, and CCR cave, and they're coming to me and they say, hey, I've heard really good things about your fundamentals class, your CCR fundamentals, or whatever. I want to become a better diver. And they've already got the cards. It says they're done. Yet they come to be a better diver. And that speaks volumes about that person, about those people, that they realize, I got a piece of plastic, but I don't want to be in a body bag. I want you to make me better. And so I'm hoping that more people are getting like that. My last student that we finished yesterday, and he passed, but there was a couple things on the last dive that he wasn't really happy about. And he learned from them. It was still adequate enough. He had done great and everything else, that he passed. And he paid me to have another day today, because he said, I don't think I'm done. As high as my standards are, he wanted more. So we did today. That's why I just got done diving before we started this video. But and I told him, I said, that speaks volumes about you. So I think there's becoming more people that realize, I want to be better. This could be a lot more fun if I wasn't struggling all the time. If I was calm and relaxed in the water like I see these people on TV doing. So I'm optimistic that it's going to grow and continue on that upward trend. That's my hopes. So what would I like to pass on and share with future generations? One, me. I want to keep going for another 10 or 15 years. So One, I've been helping instrucors and try and get people, like we talked about earlier, that care, like you. When did we do your training? 10, 12, 15 years ago. You've been teaching with me. And people love you because you have that same high standards. You carry on that cave adventure high standards. And I'd like to help more people to get to that caring, I want to make great divers, or you're going to have to come back and finish because we're not there yet. I was talking to Lamar one night on the phone, and Lamar Hires and John Jones were the only two people since, I don't know, the last 25 years that I know of that have been teaching IUCRR divers. And there's no class except you take it with Lamar or John Jones, or both. And both of them decided to retire from teaching IUCRR. And so I was told, hey, if, you're the coordinator for your area, for the whole Panhandle, so if you want more people, you teach them. But I was talking to Lamar, and I said, I'm 60 plus years old. I said, I'm getting too old to travel all over the world doing these incredibly dangerous things, getting dead bodies out. We need people. And a lot of the IUCRR divers, on one of the incidents where I went in to get an impossible one out, and that guy was a great cave diver, Jeff Bauer. He was the president of the NACD at the time, and been an IUCRR diver since like 2000. Great diver, great guy, good friend, but he couldn't do it. He called it impossible. And when the cops or the sheriff's department said, we got to get this done, he said, well, when it's impossible, we call Ed. But anyway, I said, I can't do this forever. I want to keep doing it for a long time, but we need people that aren't just trained to do the paperwork. And I said, I'm getting too old to travel all over the world pulling dead bodies out. I said, we need to start training now. And we both agreed, and then it kind of died off there until I started talking to you, and we decided we'd do it. And so that's where we're at now. We're not going to give it all away. Stay tuned. This is coming. We're in the midst of building this. But word got out last year somehow, and I only told a couple people, so I don't know how it got out. But I started getting emails. I want to be the first in that class. And it's going to be an extensive, like when we first got side mount classes. What did I come up with later? The advanced cave side mount class, where we did bottle off restrictions, and we'd have to work our way through with a bottle out and getting through really nasty stuff, because a lot of people, as they started side mounting, thought, well, I'll just go in there. And if I get stuck, I'll just back up. And that's not as easy as you might think. So I started the first advanced cave side mount class many years ago, and it became very popular. So when this was going to be somewhere along that line, not just how to do a body recovery, but how to do a body recovery in these ones that everybody else was calling impossible. Because when somebody says it's impossible, I say, here, hold my water, I'll be back in a minute. So I need to teach somebody else to carry that on. So I'd kind of like that to be something that I pass on, because the guy in the Wasissa, it came down to, they were trying to decide whether they blow the cave entrance, dynamite it shut, and that be his tomb, or do we go in with a saw and cut him up and bring him out in pieces? And I said, these families need closure, and you cannot, you bring that guy out in pieces, and that family will be in Shrinkville with a therapist for the rest of their lives. I said, we need to give them closure. This can be done. Same thing with the one in the Dominican. When I said I would do it, and we were in the midst of planning, Stacy was making reservations, flights, and then I get a call from Philip Lehman over in the DRSS, or the head of the DRSS in the Dominican, and he said, they're not going to let you come. The government said no. I said, why not? And they said, we've already had the best divers in the world. It's too dangerous. They don't want to risk anybody else's life. And I said, well, I'll pretend I'm not offended that I wasn't included in the best divers, but hey, why not? And I said, just tell them to Google my name, and they'll see that I'm actually pretty good at what I do. And so 2 hours later, he calls me back and he said, okay, the mayor said you can come. Now, granted, they've been trying this every day for 18 days, 19 different experts. And he said, the mayor said you have 8 days. If you can't get it done in 8 days, they're just going to seal that off and leave the bodies in there. So I went down and got them out. But it wasn't because I wanted to prove anything. It was because I genuinely thought that that family needed closure. And I knew that I could do it. I just knew in my soul. I knew that, you know, it's only impossible when you quit. And I don't have quit in me. So that's what I want to pass on, is I want to make sure that there's another Ed somewhere down the road that when it's impossible, call Jim or Bill or whoever it turns out to be. Or maybe a whole bunch of them. Maybe we get this to where there's, 40 or 50 or 60, so that we're not relying on one guy to go all over the world doing the impossible.